Hi, this is Gaurav.
Hi, this is Sarita, and we're in all things EdTech. So today's topic is about something that's very close to our heart, which is essentially around online education and the renewed popularity of online education, especially in the time of the Corona crisis. And as someone, as people that have been in this space for so long, it certainly makes us feel really happy to see all the sudden increased interest in online learning. While I'm just really happy to see this, it also surprises me sometimes, when in many discussions, even now, we come up against some fairly strong attitudes about online learning. And I thought we could talk about some of those today. One of the most common pushback that we get, and like I said, it continues even in current conversations in the Corona crisis, is that many people somehow deep down believe that online is just not as effective as face-to-face learning. It's a very challenging point. And so, Gaurav, what do you think?
Well, I've heard the same thing from multiple people over the last 1 month. Even people and companies who are being forced to adopt online learning are seeing this as a stopgap measure only. They feel online learning is not a substitute for in-person learning, and this is something that they would like to do in the times of Corona and in the times of lockdown. But as soon as the situation becomes better, they want to revert to in-person learning. And I find this attitude very surprising. There are a lot of things here that I don't agree with at all, starting from the fact that people feel that online learning is not as effective. Now, I have taught quite a few people in the online mode over the last 10 years, and I have done a couple of online courses myself, and I find the flexibility of the online programs just amazing. I think the fact that I can start learning at any time that I want, and I can stop learning at any time that I want, and come back to it and continue from where I left off, that itself is a big thing. So for most students, for them, since learning is the primary thing, the most important thing that they are doing at that stage of life, maybe flexibility is not as important. But nowadays, learning is no longer restricted to, let's say, the first 20 years of your life. We are talking about lifelong learners. We are talking about the need to continue to upskill yourselves, continue to learn new things. So for them, this kind of flexibility is godsend. I think that itself is one big advantage that online learning has. The fact that you could be in a city like Bombay or Bangalore, and you could save all the time commuting to your place of learning. Instead, you could learn from home. That itself is another big thing. The pace of the learning is very important, which means that people who kind of absorb things faster, they get put off after some time. The same is the case if the class is going too fast in some cases, where people who are not able to keep up with the pace of the class, after about 10 minutes into the class, they will give up and they will also switch off. So offline learning really goes at one pace, and there is only a segment of students who can keep that pace, and they are the only ones who are engaged. Whereas online learning, you can pause, you can rewind, you can see the same thing again. There are a lot of advantages to that, combined with the fact that all online classes are usually recorded, and participants often go back to the recordings of these online classes to clear up doubts, or go back to concepts which they felt after the class they had understood, but when they start doing an assignment or a question, they realize that they haven't
Hmm.
really understood the concept, so they go back to it. And online classes give them the flexibility to do that. So these are big advantages, and this is why I feel online learning is actually a better option than offline learning.
And we've seen this happen quite often, right? That people sign up for in-person classes. When they realize that they have the ability to then join them online, a lot of people actually make the switch after the first two or three classes because they realize that the learning, is the same. And in fact, online makes it a lot more convenient for them to attend.
I think this is something we have seen time and again. So I think it's more a mindset than a real difference in learning.
Yeah, and I think related to that is also this, and then of course a lot of statistics that get thrown around about completion rates of online learning, and sometimes they're as low as 2 to 3% for some of the larger MOOCs. In many of our longer term university certified programs, it tends to be 90% or higher. But there is certainly this expectation, or maybe this understanding that completion rates are low. There are, I think, a couple of real issues with, first of all, how completion rates are even calculated. But what do you think?
I think these completion rates are a complete myth. I think these completion rates have been touted by some people based on what they've seen on Coursera or other MOOC platforms. In a MOOC environment on Coursera, students can enroll into any online program that they want at no cost to them. They can attend whatever they want. They can stop attending whenever they want. They have a certain degree of anonymity. Contrast this situation to a classroom situation. You have a professor who's teaching a class. Firstly, to enroll into the program, there is a lot of effort that you have to do. It's not just at the click of a button
Mm,
that you can enroll into a
okay.
program. There is that social pressure on you that if you are entering the class, you want to make sure you enter on time. You don't want to leave the class halfway. Now, sitting in a class and actually absorbing anything that's going on in the class, these are two very different things. I have sat in so many
Mm,
classes where I've just been doodling, I've been drawing, or I've been doing mental maths, mental calculations, and I'm really not absorbing anything. But from a purely statistical data point of view, I have attended that class and maybe I have completed that course also. So I think these low completion rates are complete baloney. And I think if you have to do a real comparison, you have to see how many people are actually sitting in the class and absorbing what is going on in the class and not just sitting there for the sake of attendance.
Yeah, I think one of the advantages of MOOCs, of course, is the ability to to sample a lot of different things that you may be interested in,
Yeah,
and therefore I think completion rates tend to be low. And when there is a commitment, when there is a serious interest, when there is a amount of effort that people spend to get into the program, even if it is online, I think the completion rates there are very healthy. So I agree with you. One of the things that I see in terms of attitude is also that I think for whatever reason, people look at an online course of, let's say, a difficult topic, and they somehow expect it to be easier than a face-to-face class. This is a kind of a funny attitude, right? Because the topic is what it is, and if you have to learn, you have to put in effort. And in fact, in online, you have to put in a different kind of effort to make sure that you're following and that you're not losing track. Um,
exactly. I think in most people's mind, they are equating an online course to watching videos on YouTube. And they are
mm,
surprised when, as you go into deeper topics, things become more complicated and they have to actually pay attention and they have to make all that effort, which they are not used to doing with most kind of online content, be it YouTube videos or articles, blog articles, or anything like that. And I think people, not only the learners but also the creators of content, sometimes get confused whether what they are doing is education or entertainment,
entertainment.
and
Yes,
they are trying to
yes.
bridge the gap. And when I see things like bite-sized learnings and 30-second videos and 1-minute videos, well, they can work for maybe a very specific set of topics where you just need very high level superficial knowledge to understand the topic. But when it comes to more complex subjects, I don't think a 30-second video or a 2-minute video can give you anything useful. And those that kind of content will be dense, it will be complex, it will take time to understand it. And that's just the effort that people have to put in, regardless of whether they are in an online environment or a live offline class.
Mm,
And I think people are slowly getting around to understanding that distinction.
absolutely.
Yeah, I think the other thing that I'm seeing right now is that because online learning is the only option that is there now, a lot of people who are not familiar with online learning are being forced to get into it very quickly without enough practice or without enough guidance. There are people who are taking these webinars, who are taking these classes, and maybe they have fantastic knowledge of the subject, but in an online classroom they are not able to give that impression out to the learners. And Sarita, you have taken thousands of classes over the last 10 years. The feedback that we've got has always been excellent. So what do you do differently in an online class from an offline class? How do you make your classes effective? How do you make sure the learners are engaged?
That's a really good question because I've taken many classes, but I've also, I think, coached a lot of people in sort of getting them ready to sort of deliver effective online classes, and it takes a fair amount of planning. So I think the things that you want to think about is making sure that you have a plan for how you plan to deliver, and that plan should include what are you going to do in terms of making sure that the class is very interactive, because it's very easy to deliver an online class as a one-way sort of monologue, and you have no idea at what point if the audience is still following you or not. Second is, how do you sort of encourage student interaction between themselves, right? It could be something that you're planning as part of your coursework, that encourages students to talk to each other, even though they're part of an online class.
I was just going to say, this interactivity is something that I have always struggled with in an online class. And I have found polls to be a very effective icebreaker, or, a very effective way of getting more people to engage. And then from participating in polls, you can gradually draw them out into participating in conversations, etc.
Yeah, I think it's also important to think about the batch size, right? Sometimes people get carried away with the ability of online to scale. So I can
Oh,
have
yes.
thousands of students in my class, but 1,000 students is not a recipe for learning. And of course, we've done thousands only in the context of informational webinars, not necessarily teaching per se,
Mhm.
because it is hard to sort of keep up with a very diverse audience that is that's so large in volume, right? I think having smaller batch sizes, maybe 30, 35 at the most, for many technical sort of classes is very, very important, because that is what gives you the ability to sort of make sure that everyone's on track, and that they
Mhm.
have the opportunity to ask you questions, and that it is much more a learning experience than just a listening experience. I think that becomes very, very important, and of
So,
course
what's your
feedback.
ideal batch size, Sarita?
If the topic is not very complex, you're talking concepts, etc., then maybe 40, 45, 50 you can manage. But if you're doing something really technical, then I would say 35 to 40. I have done classes that are larger in size, but they have been long programs where the students have had an opportunity to get to know each other, and so they're much
Right.
more of a unit. You should know every student by name, and you should know where they're at.
Also, I think the context of the class, like you said, where you are just revising some of the topics that were done earlier, or if it's a
Mm.
doubt clearing session, maybe you can have a larger number of students. But if you're trying to explain a topic for the first time and it's a complex topic, then a smaller number is usually better.
Is
Yeah.
But I think the most important thing is to be innovative in how you deliver. Even people who've been teaching for a long time, they're used to a certain style, they know their subject, and they come in and they just assume that, okay, now I'm speaking to a laptop screen instead of speaking in a classroom, and it does not work. People learn differently in online, and so therefore you have to deliver differently in online. I think that very important to acknowledge, and then constantly keep thinking about how do you keep the students engaged, and how do you know how much progress they're making. It becomes very, very important.
Is there anything teachers should be looking at to doing outside of the class?
One of the things that we should be encouraging in online classes is more student interaction, right? One of the objections to sort of online learning is that peer-to-peer interactions don't happen, and therefore you need to be able to design elements of your teaching that require that student interaction, right? So you could give them group work, you could give them things like hackathons for people to work on in groups, and then we've successfully done it. And in fact, in some cases, even though the program is primarily online, if you have a bunch of people from one city, then they sort of do meetups as well, and that also goes a long way in sort of getting the outcomes that you're aiming for.
Yeah. And on that note, may I ask you, Sarita, for if you have three things that you would like to tell online teachers or learners that can help improve their experience, what would those be?
I think I'll start with sort of a tangential point, but going back to the kid in candy store sort of analogy. don't go into many of these programs with no clear idea, and then because that's basically going to lead to a lot of dissatisfaction. You're going to drop out of many programs, and then you're going to say, oh, online learning is not for me, when really it is not online learning per se, but it's your, the fit of the program, that really, do you have the time, do you have the interest, does it make sense for you to learn this,
That's a
which
very
is
good point. I think while
very.
MOOCs have definitely democratized learning, this is one big problem they've created. There is no entry criteria, or there are no barriers to entry into an online
Mm,
program. And I wish there were some barriers so that people are more careful about what they get into. And I think
mm.
just that simple fact would improve the completion rates significantly.
Okay, so I had one point. What is your top point?
So my point, I think, more for teachers. One of the things that I have realized, in terms of engaging the class, is oftentimes when you're in an online class, people are not asking you questions orally. They are using a chat window to ask these questions. So earlier, when I used to take a class, somebody would ask a question, and I would start answering that question. And later, when I got feedback from the students, and when I went through my recordings, I realized that it was completely breaking the flow of the class. So I would be
Mm,
teaching topic A, and someone has just asked me a question on topic B, and I would start answering it, and it would break the flow for the rest of the learners. So now I
mm,
take questions at specific times so as not to break the flow of the class, and I always make sure to repeat the question that is asked and who has asked the question. And I
mm.
think that helps other people understand what is going on, when you're responding to student queries.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's a really, really important point. Um, I think my second point would be around, I would say passivity. Learners have to sort of really put in energy and understand that this is an active process. There is no learning by listening, right? You have to
Mhm.
participate in the class, you have to listen, you have to pay attention, you have to ask questions. It has to be as active as it can get. And all online platforms, in fact, um, allow you to sort of, engage in the class with high levels of interactivity. So I think that becomes very important from a learner perspective.
That's a very good point, and my second point is actually just the other side of this, which is for teachers would be always be encouraging when students are asking questions, and especially in the first 10 to 15 minutes of the lecture, because that will set the tone for the rest of the lecture.
Absolutely, you're so right. Very, very important to encourage, especially in the beginning. Yeah, I don't know if I have a third point. I would say it's more an observation than a point, which is that I think it's important for us to figure out, what kind of learning style we have, and make sure that we understand it, when we start any learning process. What is it that, sort of makes online learning work for you? I think it's important to figure that out, because definitely a lot of learning is going to be online. I think, for the rest of our professional careers, for a lot of us.
Yep, I completely agree. And I think there is a lot of literature that is available online now, talking about online learning, talking about people's experiences, talking about best practices, and so on. And I would encourage all new online teachers and learners to go and look at this literature, look at this material that is available, and make use of this information.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's just so much information already available that can be leveraged. So totally make use of that. 100% agree. Great. So
Yeah,
I think
so
this
I
is a really interesting discussion.
Yes, really enjoyed it. This is a topic that is very close to my heart, and I know your heart as well, Sarita. And I really enjoyed the conversation, and I hope our audience also enjoys listening to us. Take care and stay safe. Thank you.